senior executives. I've got Gordon Kirk to help me. Cliff's going to focus on the team. At the same time, he's very available to be a resource.
Richard, you talked about the new person coming in being both an expert builder for the future and a short-term fixer. Aren't those divergent goals, and doesn't that premise set one up for failure from the start if you're looking at building for the future and short-term fixes?
In business today, you have to be a bit of both, and in sports, you have to be a bit of both. Cliff's going to set us up for, as he said, he's going to analyze the team. He doesn't have a point of view on it now that he's comfortable with speaking about. Again, he can re-emphasize that, but he'll prepare us for the new person. So that's, the short term, and he may have to do more than that. And then long term, turning this team around will go to the new individual.
Hi, Cliff and Rich. This is really for both of you. Cliff, you mentioned 19 months, sort of a number that comes out of nowhere. But are you looking beyond that? Would you like to be in the role? We always use Scotty Bowman as an example, as someone who can be the person that ideas can be bounced off of long term until you decide to retire. And Richard, is that something that you're looking at as well as a possibility, although you've only committed to the 19 months?
Howie, 19 months is a fair term. And, I think it would depend as we go forward what my contributions would be if I was on board and if they were necessary. I'm fully aware of that. But I'm happy to be back at this type of press conference. When I was introduced in 1991 as the president and GM of the Leafs, I said I was very fortunate to have started my career with the Montreal Canadiens and hopefully end it with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, that didn't happen 10 years ago, but it's going to happen this time.
Cliff gives us his experience, in this contract that we've done, gives us the luxury of conducting an absolutely thorough search. We're going to go out and get the right man for the job, and we have time to do that.
Richard, and I guess maybe Cliff, was the Raptors' model for success with Brian and Wayne followed in this process, and the portfolio that Cliff will have in terms of maybe preparing things for his successor as Wayne did for Brian?
Well, it is kind of coincidental. About 2 years ago at this time, we elected to make a change in mid-season. We put out the shingle. We're surprised that Brian was available. We were fortunate to get Brian. I'd like to think lightning will strike twice, but at the same time, we won't rush to fill this. We're going to get the right person. And when that person comes in, like Brian, they will be president, and like Brian, will build their own team.
Cliff, what are your thoughts on the lineup as it sits right now?
Well, it's a team that's trying hard to compete for a playoff spot. There are 7 teams in their category that are within 6 points of each other, with 33 games left to play. So we all know the history, the last 2 years, missing the playoffs by 2 points one year and 1 point the other. But the question you ask yourself is that good enough? And the answer is obvious, it isn't. I mean, the key here is to develop a team that will have the capability of competing with the top teams in the league, as I alluded to a few moments ago. And so that means the team's going to have to be improved. Now, unfortunately today, the situation in running a hockey club is not like it was prior to the lockout. Prior to the lockout, the affluent teams in the league pretty well had a captive market as far as free agents went. And as an organization, if you struggled or made poor draft choices or didn't develop a lot of your own young players, you could camouflage that if you had the money to spend by adding a couple extra free agents. Today, if you want to compete, you have to draft well and you have to develop your own core of young players. Last year in the league, 27 of the 30 teams were within 10% of the cap. That means you have 3 and 4 times the number of teams being legitimate contenders to sign free agents than before the lockout. So while each team may get its share of 1 or 2 free agents or 3 with a cap system, you have to have that base of solid young players that you draft and develop yourself. That's the only way you're going to get some sort of sustainable success in a league now today that's pretty well designed for teams not to be able to be on top too long, but supposedly you're not supposed to be down too long either. That was a long-winded answer.
Cliff, over here. Just to follow up on what you were just saying, is there any way to make this team the team that you envision other than tearing it down? Blowing it up is the phrase you hear a lot in Toronto, and starting all over again with a series of high draft picks over a few years. Is there any other way to do it?
Well, you have to draft well to start with. Let's face it, you look at a team like New Jersey at first-round picks, they weren't early first-round picks, and they picked up Parise and Zajac. And the lower-round picks, you have to do a total job of good scouting, and you have to get a little lucky too. But today, there's no doubt, without that core of young players, it's going to be a constant struggle. So that has to be the prerequisite of starting to rebuild a team. Whether you have to tear a team down or just take away parts or whatever, you have to develop that core of young players.
Cliff, many people believe that in order to start this process, you'll have to convince Mats maybe to waive his no trade. Can you address that possible situation, please?
No, I don't think I choose to talk about it now, other than to say that Matt's been here since 1994, and he'll go down in history as one of the greatest Maple Leaf players ever. He's been a great leader. He's been a very durable player, and I think the most important thing is to do what's right for Mats.
Richard, just as you look at John's tenure, how do you think it will be remembered?
History has a way of writing itself over time. When he played 5 years, he gave it a good shot, learned a lot, but in the end, frankly, the job wasn't done. We didn't realize our ambitions. But I really believe that, and Cliff and I have talked about it, that John's 40 years old. He's, if you look at people like Cliff, who's a little older than that, he's got 30 years of great career ahead of him. And this was his start. Arguably one of the most difficult places to start, and I was kidding John this morning. I said, whatever the next stop is will be a lot easier.
Cliff, just to follow up on your thoughts on Mats, you said the most important thing is to do what's right for Mats. Isn't the most important thing to do what's right for the Toronto Maple Leafs first, ahead of Mats?
That's right, Damien, but Mats is driving the engine here. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, and he has a no-trade clause.
Richard, from the standpoint of board involvement, what will change for the next general manager, if any, as opposed to John Ferguson's tenure?
Do you know, there's a myth out there that our general managers don't have autonomy. We do meet as a board. Our general managers communicate. We have discussion. On some subjects, a lot we don't. The general managers just inform the board of a free agent they've signed or a move that they've made, and something really material to come in and present their rationale to do that, as any good person does in a senior management role. But in the end, in my 10 years here, the board has never turned down the request of a general manager in any of our sports. So in that sense, Cliff in his interim will brief the board on his thoughts once he gets a good handle on the team and on where he goes. And the new person will have dialogue with our board, but the person will have autonomy.
You call it a myth, and yet it seems clear to just about everyone that the operation of the basketball club and the operation of the hockey club were not similar since Brian Colangelo came
They're
aboard.
absolutely the same. You're not part of the board meetings where they have autonomy. They come in, tell us what they're doing, and we've never turned one down.
Richard, should you have figured this out last summer in terms of firing John or extend him instead of him coming into this year as a lame duck GM?
You know, we said we'd be very methodical about this. We were close. John believed he could do some things in the offseason. You know what the moves were.